October 26th meeting to order, and if we could stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We can have a roll call, please.
Jenny Savigny.
Yes, here.
O'Shea,
Yes, ma'am.
David Newell.
Yes.
Justin Zane.
Present.
Christopher is excused. Jenny O'Shea, not here. Neil Wallen.
Here.
All right. We have the approval of the minutes from the September 28th, 2021. And I had some corrections, and rather than go through painstakingly, I just typed them up and gave them to everyone. Danielle's got a copy. So if you're okay with those corrections, then we can just approve the meeting minutes as amended.
I second it.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Amended meeting minutes are approved for September 28th. Next is the approval of today's agenda. I have one item to add. I think it would go under number 8, communications and notices. It's just to give a little feedback on the meeting Bob held over the Renaissance parking and traffic issue that was experienced at the end of their season. There were several participants, and so he just wanted to give a little have me give a little update on that. So we'll amend that, add that under 8 as far as communications. And that would be the only additions or changes I have.
I make a motion, we make that change and we accept the new agenda.
A second.
Who wants to claim? Danielle, who'd you get for the second?
It was a tie.
I was David.
Okay, that's good. That's good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Meeting as a meeting agenda as amended is approved. So then that goes to communications. Bob, it was actually a very productive meeting. I think one that all parties seem to benefit from, getting in the one room at one time and talking. So there was the Holly Township supervisor, Oakland County Sheriff, a representative from the State Police Department, members of the Planning Commission, Bob, and the office. So and the Renaissance Festival, Kathy and her son. And you know, the State Police and the Oakland County Police said, by only having one entrance and one exit, there's no way you can get beyond that. That is your bottleneck, and unless you resolve that, you're not going to resolve the traffic issue. So Kathy talked about, well, you know, she's submitted in previous years additional entrance and exits to the site off of Holdridge Road and Laring Road, those two roads. And then so they are looking at one on each road, and then an additional one on Dixie Highway, for a total of 3 on Dixie Highway. And what they'll do is based on traffic, right? They'll utilize as needed, but try to get exits to get people to the south and then not have north and south traffic. They recognize that the traffic on the adjacent roads, Perryville and Groveland, were horrific. And so Kathy will be coming hopefully the November meeting to present a site plan for those, what'll end up being 3 additional entrances and exits for a total of 5 to that site. And you know, as we questioned it, some of it, one or two of them is going to require the Holly Township signing. I think we'll only be doing the Dixie Highway. The other 2 will have to go to the Planning Commission for Holly Township, and they'll have to address that. But it seemed to be agreeable to the parties, so.
Does the Renaissance Festival have frontage on, was it Holbrook Road? Or
Holdridge,
Laren? Holdridge?
both, they have access to both. One,
Okay.
they talked about having an emergency exit there years ago, but the Holly Planning Commission, for whatever reason, had turned them down. So the Kathy was planning on coming to the November with a site plan for approval, and for us, it would just be the additional entrance off of Dixie Highway. So that was it. It was Kathy left a happy camper, which is unusual when we have these meetings talking about traffic issues with her. So, but everybody felt pretty positive that, you know, this was going to be a way to address it. Do I have any comments on that?
That wasn't the problem. The problem was that whatever GPS they were using was routing them down back roads. So that's where your problem is. It's never gonna, in 6 years, we haven't had parking problems like that on side roads.
Yeah, that was, so they're gonna look at, one, no one was aware of how to address Google Maps. The Google Maps is gonna do that. You know, so
Right.
they that was not an issue they felt they could address. But making sure there's signage on the roads, no parking, Dixie, Groveland, and Perryville, you know, so that there's no parking on it. Even if they just, and they talked about, well, what if a resident has a large party and they want people parking on the shoulder? They said, well, they'll do maybe seasonal. So they're going to work with Oakland County Road Commission to talk about what signage they could do to address that issue. But they thought that,
Even signage, so they were coming across at Trip, coming down Van, coming down Perryville, they were coming from Groveland down Van to Perryville. So once they put the state trooper at Trip Road and Van, that stopped the flow that way. But there needs to be signage there too, like no festival traffic, you have to go to the main roads.
yeah, that wasn't discussed, so I can't speak to that. The way I would address that is, I think the thought is by getting better movement of the traffic through Laring Road, Holdridge, and an additional one on Dixie, they won't have the backup that causes people to get rerouted to these secondary roads. Because, I mean, I drove by on a Sunday and the weekend before the last and was shocked. You know, it
I
was,
called the fire chief and I said, you need to get out here and look at this. You guys could not get a truck through here. if you wanted to."
yeah, it was, I've never seen it like that.
And
And
people coming up to my front door asking if they could pay me $20 to park in the front door on Sunday. I said, no, you get out of here right now. Like, no. I was on the road with some lady tried to hit me with a car. I said, what are you doing? Like, go back the way you came from. You're not, no, you gotta get out of here. This is not okay. And it was crazy. People were walking by like, you do understand, your cars may not be here when you come back. We don't care, we don't care, we don't care. Flinging turkey legs at me on their way back, saying,
Is that right?
oh, you find entertainment in the discomfort of others. Like, I mean, it was
Oh my
insane, insane.
They literally blocked the
When they
driveway.
literally towed those cars, they were sitting on the guy's lawn at the end of Perryville and Dixie. And we were sitting on the corner and they were screaming, those are the people that did this. Like, they're coming over, they were asking us for rides to their car. Yeah. And when I said, no, I'm not driving you to Pontiac to your car because you make poor decisions, she then said, you're the one that did this, and then got them all riled up, like coming at me, like, she did
Right.
this, she called the police. I'm like, no, the fire chief called the police on you because you blocked the main road. I'm just sitting here for energy.
You just can't reason with them.
It's
Half of them were
ridiculous.
drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something.
yeah, it was absolutely, totally unacceptable. I mean, everybody
Well,
felt
then,
that.
and like the lady across the street, she's like, this is my Monday to grocery shop. She goes, they just made my husband go all the way to Groveland, wouldn't even let him turn in, and go all the way to Groveland, come all the way down Van, he had to fight all the cars down there to get home, and she couldn't even get up to go grocery shopping.
Yeah, it was, and you know, we we had gone for a period of time with the Renaissance Festival where things were running smoothly. And so we said, we'll do 3-year permits, come in once every 3 years. And then we had a blow up. It was several years ago. And we said, that's it.
It was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
that I had another
And we,
6 years. So you had a 6-year window.
yeah, and we said, okay, none of that. You come in every year because we want to talk about this. And one of the things that they didn't have, and she said, what they'll end up having to do is probably buy, but they didn't have any signage. We had wanted digital boards that they could change the message and say, Renaissance full, closed,
Yeah.
And she said, well, I think because of COVID, things are still kind of crazy. She said she couldn't rent any signs. And we're like, well, then I guess you're gonna have to buy some,
Right.
So there were things there that could have happened that didn't. But the Michigan State Police officer,
They were
apparently,
amazing.
he said he's done traffic at U of M football, Pine Knob, and he said, I'm telling you, it's your,
This is the first year there's been accidents, like, seriously, they were U-turning, like squealing tires, screaming at each other, like they would come turn off of Perryville and then just bust U's right in the middle, right before you got to the top of the hill, and then cut the line, so then you had people like screaming at each other, fighting. There were 2 really bad accidents right there this year. I don't ever remember there being bad accidents like that. But my favorite was the guy whose car was already on the tow truck in my front yard. He had to pay to get it off, and then said, I'm coming back and I'm gonna roll your whole house. And I said,
Roll your house.
I took a picture of his license
yeah, he
plate.
was like, we had my camera, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna come back and toilet paper this whole house. Like,
Oh.
you're gonna pay for it, lady. Like, toilet paper's expensive right now. Like, your next tow bill, I don't know, but.
Must have hoarded
Yeah,
some.
he literally his car was half my driveway was blocked by his car.
They used to post no U-turn signs, I thought, like
yeah,
There are some,
in the fall, and they would take them down.
there are some, but there's none in that strip. Where they're doing them. They're south of there.
yeah, apparently on Dixie Highway, are you referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob said that he went, and there are some,
And there's no parking at the beginning of Perryville, but once the apron's gone.
then it's gone, yeah. Yeah, so signage is one of the things that they were gonna take a look at and have discussions with Oakland County with as far as what they could do. And then, Kathy will come in with some proposals for some additional entrances, but the police were very adamant that based on their experience with other large crowds, that if we can get more ingress and egress to that site, we'll be able to move the traffic and it won't back up like it did. Because I think if we can keep it flowing on Dixie, then they're not going to get rerouted and they're not going to want to go on a gravel road. They'll stay on paved. So
So do you think that the ORV park, I know they were having Four Fest too that weekend.
yeah, I saw people trying to get in there.
So yeah, so it kind of bottlenecks there at Mount Holly, and then I think like at that point, then it.
I mean, we're gonna, the ORV park is still kind of growing and developing, and I don't think anyone really
Yeah,
has a
I mean, I
good
get that.
sense
But I
for
think
what
that
it
was
is, but
definitely part of it.
one of the things Bob has talked about, and everybody boo-boos and says, that'll never happen, but he's talked about at the Mount Holly in that area, getting a special ramp off of I-75. And then that way you wouldn't have to come through like Grange Hall or come all the way down. If you could get access, kind of like they do at the Chrysler
Yeah,
Old Tech Center, how you have a special ramp off to get when you get a large volume of traffic.
But
So-
they always had a gate that would go right directly to the freeway ramp too.
Yeah, so I mean, there's, as things grow and develop, and let's say, I mean, it'd be great, right, if that ORV park just took off and, did a great job, but again, we have to make sure we manage the traffic, and I think being close to I-75 is gonna help us if we get in a jam, down the road here, that might be an option we can talk to the state about. Well, we will keep our fingers
So next year.
crossed. I think we are, I think we'll be very supportive to Kathy and when she comes in with a site plan to put another entrance or exit on Dixie, whatever they're gonna term it. And then we'll just hope that the township supervisor for Holly indicated he thought their planning commission would be receptive to helping, So I think we got a plan. Now we just gotta see if it works.
A little bit of input. Whenever we've asked Kathy to do anything, she's always been on task to do it. And I've been on this for well over 20 years. So hopefully, if she can get it, property, whatever, to get it done, she will really, really try.
Right.
But I apologize for the inconvenience you guys have had to put up with this year.
Yeah.
Ungodly.
And
And
COVID didn't help because everybody's kind of tough and
Yeah.
wanted to do something and it's outdoors. And the beginning of their season was
We
so
still were
hot.
there one day. I mean, we visit. It's not like we hate the Renaissance. I mean, we've been there. I went more
I mean,
this
you
year.
can walk
I went
across
more
the-
this year than I've been in my entire life, but I walked across the street. I walked home, but yeah. it's-
didn't anybody ask you where you parked your car?
And the deputies knew who we were and we kept walking.
All right. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks for your input. And again, we are sorry for the troubles you went
didn't do
through.
it.
Right.
I know, but hopefully we can work on addressing it so it doesn't happen. So the next item on the agenda is the really going to be Michelle talking to us, but and this is where we had talked about how we want to redo our zoning ordinances. They're archaic. There's somewhat broken references and links between the various ones. They're old, they're written in legalese and kind of hard to understand, and there's ambiguity. And so we want to make sure that, everybody's familiar and knowledgeable and is able to understand our ordinances, whether it's the staff here or residents that want to do something and, look up an ordinance to see if, what the requirements are. It's kind of hard to tell. It's a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle right now. So the goal is to simplify it. And we had a sort of a scoping meeting with Michelle. And we talked about kind of how we want to go through it. So we, one way to do it is to take what we have and kind of reword it. And we said, it's so bad, let's not reword it, let's just redo it. So, yeah, really, kind of bulldoze it and start over. But so I'm gonna turn it over to you to discuss, but one of the things I want to talk about in general is, as you go through what you've prepared for us tonight, how do you want us to input? I mean, do you want to stop and ask questions, or do you want us to raise our hand and ask questions? Or, I mean, how do you want us to do this? And then the second thing is, because we are redoing this, and you may have listed it here and it didn't pop out at me, but I think we're going to need some sort of a table for tracking. And then, here's what, ordinance 54-123, and now here's where it is, in the new section. So we make sure we didn't drop any, and then the other, so we'll need some tracking mechanism, ordinance by ordinance. The other thing would be to discuss, as we go forward, we may very well, I think there's like kind of 4 categories. You can delete, some ordinances that really we don't want anymore or not relevant. We could add new ordinances, or we could modify an ordinance that either A, doesn't really change the substance of it, or does change the substance of it. And how do we go about doing that? Because we'll need public hearings, but do we do it in batches? So just the logistics of how we're gonna go through this. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks. So we formed a steering committee So there will be representation from the planning commission. And then there will also be staff. And then is there someone from the board of trustees? as
Was it
well?
Jim?
Jim supposed to be.
So, so we met with the steering committee, like Jenny said, we had sort of a scoping session. So what you have in front of you is how we're going to reorganize the zoning ordinance, and then the notes that we took from that meeting, so you can see after today's meeting where we're gonna go and spend our time. So I started here with general objectives that we talked about when we met. So like Jenny said, we want to streamline the language. We want to remove redundancies and also references to, you know, clauses that no longer exist. We want to clarify any contradiction. So it says you can do something here and then here it doesn't. So we'll be reading for that. We're going to try to write everything in plain English. But I did tell the township, this will have to go through your attorney. So
Yes.
some of that might get turned back on. And then we want to turn things into tables and illustrations as much as possible. So at the end of your packet, I showed you some examples that we'll get to that show how things are more in a tabular form, so that if you want to know what use you have, you can go to one table and see in what zones it's permitted instead of having to
Yeah.
sift through every single zone and, you know, look through a list. And then we want to hyperlink it as well. It's mainly going to be used digitally. So if someone wants to click on a zone, or for example, a definition that's in the text, click on it and it'll bring up what the definition is. So it'll be a lot more user friendly. And then of course, our due diligence. We have to make sure that all of the state statutes that we know of in case law are included that may have been left out in the last 5 or 10 years as things have changed. And then because we just finished the master plan, we want to make sure that we're aligning with that.
How are you planning on, yes, to the state statutes, that we make sure we've got them indicated, but what about all of the historical references we have in a section? So, you know, as you go through the book, you'll see in the 2004 version, you know, it was 54-123, and back in the 1990 version. So it's got revisional history as kind of a footnote on that particular ordinance. Are you planning on keeping that? Or is it, I would recommend a table if in fact, because there were times when we went back, when we were rewriting one of the ordinances, we went back and looked at prior versions, because they have them here in the office to say, you know, did they just, you know, copy this wrong, or was it, you know, because sometimes there's questions about what was and what is.
When
So,
did it change? That type of
yeah,
thing.
and you know, what did it used to be this way, or, you know, kind of thing.
Well, I guess that goes with part of your question of how are we going to track the changes over time? So what we mainly do is we start with what you have. And then we will do like what you did for the meeting minutes. We'll use track changes. And, you know, you can see here that we have a different format of articles 1 through 14. So say I'm taking something from your original ordinance that's in Article 12, and now in our new format it's going to be under Article 2. We'll generally put in parentheses at the end of each line where it originally came from. So you can track that way, and that might be a version you just keep internally, because the final version usually, by the time we've all agreed on the new language, we'll erase those. But I will ask Sarah, if you remember my colleague Sarah, how she's tracked them, because we usually, when we rewrite them, don't hold on.
Yeah, but my thought is that something doesn't get missed. So that's why I was thinking of a table. So it could be, you're going to reference that this section 1, 2, 3 previously was under Article 4, you know, blah, blah. But what I want to know is if there's 1,000 ordinances today, that when we're done, we account for those 1,000 ordinances. We may not, some may be deleted or combined with others, and we may end up, we only have 800 ordinances. But I want to make sure that what we started with, nothing fell through the cracks.
So like there's a list of all the originals and we can say these all went to these
Yeah,
places.
yeah.
I mean, for every single line.
Ordinance, no, so,
Major
I'm only
topic.
working with the zoning ordinance. When you say
I'm
1,000
sorry.
ordinances, I don't know.
okay. So we have in zoning, I'm gonna just go pick one up here. You have Article 2, construction of language, and you got section 54-19 definitions,
Oh, every section.
every section. I want to know, and I don't, you know, that there's 50 parts in there. I don't care about that. I want to know that section 54-19 was addressed somehow in the new ordinance, and it didn't get dropped.
Right, the problem is that maybe half of section 54-13 is gonna get removed, and then the other half.
And
is
that's
gonna
fine.
get removed Somewhere, so if that were to happen, what part do you wanna know?
I want to know, I want a table, and I want section, I'm making this up, 54-19 in the existing, and then what happened to it? And you could say partial, and it doesn't have to be definitive, but, or, you know, in great detail, but 50 part went to 54-23, part no omitted because obsolete, you know, but just something that I know you did, you know, that it was addressed.
Mhm.
Okay, so you mean like 54-123? And then you want it to be like whatever the new one is, used to be 54-123? Like,
Or, you
what
know,
is it now?
what is it now? So it's 54-23,
Got it.
and but part of it
What the
was
changes
omitted.
were.
Yes, just so I know, just so we make sure we didn't drop anything.
Is
all
this
we
just
come-
zoning stuff or is this all ordinances?
Just zoning, just zoning.
Yeah.
We're the,
I think that we can do that.
it should just be an Excel spreadsheet, right? You list all the section numbers, and then
Yeah.
we just have some way to say how it ended up.
We just have to keep track of that because things change a lot during the process, so we'll set that up.
Yeah, and again, so section 54-19 is definitions, and there's probably
A lot of those.
30 subsections to that, right? A, B, C, D. We don't have to track to that level.
Okay,
Just the 54-19. What did you do with it?
okay.
Where it went?
Okay, so then if you want to talk a little bit more about process and logistics, if you guys go to page 4, that's where we have the proposed schedule. And those dates are going to be us meeting with the steering committee. But my intention is that after every meeting with the steering committee, you know, the following planning commission will report back to what we discussed and what the major changes are. But you can see we've had to group these in such a way, you know, zoning ordinances are challenging in that you want to do them section by section because otherwise it's too much to take on at once, it's hundreds of pages, but that a lot of them refer to other sections, right? So we've tried to group them in such a way where we know that, you know, Articles 7 and 8 generally refer to each other a lot. They align a lot, same with 11 and 12. So we're gonna do those 4 together, bring them to you, do another 4 that are commonly kind of self-referential. So this is what we've laid out as the preliminary schedule. So there would be 4 more meetings with the steering committee, and then, like I said, peppered in, relaying back to the planning commission when they need to let you guys know what's changed.
So in 2022, there'll be monthly meetings of the planning commission. So what would your recommendation be? So the planning commission will be meeting monthly. You would do every other month?
Well, I guess it depends on, and I don't know if we picked a date and time when the steering committee meets. My preference would be, if I'm going to come here to do it in person, that we would just do it right before the planning commission meeting. And then we can just put that right, and it'll already be in the agenda and we can talk about it. If we're gonna do it in, via Zoom, then we probably just wanna schedule it a week or so ahead of time so that the things we've discussed, we can think about and summarize and bring to the planning commission. So I probably would just want to schedule them a little bit before the planning commission, and then we can give monthly updates to the planning commission.
Okay.
Are we gonna start this December or January?
December.
So the other thing, do you have an official list of who's on the steering
Yeah.
committee? Do you? Okay. Who is it?
Me, Bob, Janelle, Jim Christopher, Jerry, and you.
So we want planning commission representation, obviously, but we just have to have less than a quorum, so as long as there's 3 or fewer, and then staff who have to deal with applications or applicants calling, the ones who are flipping through the zoning ordinance all the time. And the only other thing I could think of is a board of trustees, but if one of the planning commissioners is the liaison, then that would.
Jim Christopher
Yeah,
is.
then that fills that role. And I think that's a good amount of people. I don't think we want, generally, I would say with the steering committee, we don't ever want too many more than 9 or 10. So it's, we can, and we'll just slow down.
Okay.
So is that clear about what the process is gonna be and the timing?
Well-
Proposed timeline, but if we bring things to the planning commission and they want to see bigger changes, things may get delayed a little bit. This is kind of.
So, so that I understand, so you would take currently Article 7 of the ordinance, Article 8, 11, and 12, all the sections underneath those articles, and work them into, some may go into what's going to be Article 3 now.
No, so these articles are the way that
You are proposing, okay, so these
So
aren't
we're gonna be
existing.
pulling yours into our framework.
Got it. Okay, so this is the new framework.
Yeah.
And this is based on things you've done with other townships to simplify it.
Yeah.
And so you will, I'm being nitty picky here, just to make sure we all understand. So you will put all of this in a Word document with track changes, so folks can take a look at it. And then will you have sort of like we've done in the past where people can put edits in the document, you see it, and what feedback are you looking for when you
Yeah.
provide that to the planning
So-
commission?
My preference is that we send this to you a week to 10 days before the steering committee meeting. You make your own notes and you bring them. It's very difficult logistically on my end to have 6 different people send me 6 different things.
Okay.
And to organize that. So what I prefer is everyone, they make their notes, we talk about them. And then if there's consensus on something, then I will make those changes. But
Okay.
if everyone's making changes in one document, one person could say something and the next comment could completely
Yep,
contradict that, and then I don't know what to do.
So that-
I'll have to talk to you about it anyway,
Yeah.
so.
So that's to the steering committee. You're saying, I'm gonna send this out, make your own comments, corrections,
Yeah.
bring it to the meeting, we'll discuss it. Now you're ready. Now, once a month, you're going to send it to the planning commission?
Yeah, so if we schedule this meeting, the steering committee meeting a week before planning commission, and at that steering committee meeting, I get all of your comments, then I'll have some time to organize them, summarize them, and then I can say to the planning commission, this is what we talked about, and these are the major changes that we have decided to make. But we want to run it past you first because you're the ultimate adopting body.
Well, township, yeah.
Yeah.
So so what you are looking for then is the same process with the planning commission members, that they'll make their notes if they have input.
Well, it'll more be like we're reporting back to them.
Okay.
What the steering committee came up with.
Okay,
But if the planning commission wants to take it upon themselves to read all of it, I can send it to you as well.
there's your invitation, guys.
I can send it to you as well. But the point of the steering committee is that.
Right.
You don't have to.
Yeah, so, yeah, just, yeah, no, just want to be clear, so we know what the expectations are, and you know, you're welcome to provide input, but
Yeah.
again, you can delegate to your
Exactly.
committee, you know, subcommittee.
Right.
Um,
Are you guys
So-
okay with that process?
I
Yeah.
am,
Yes.
Okay.
and so for the, it actually would work out well in that the planning commission does not meet in December.
Oh, you don't?
So,
Is that
so,
what you said?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
so this actually would work out well, though, in that it gives December, which is a hectic month for people, but it gives us a chance to meet and work on stuff. And then you'll still have it ready, right, before the January meeting. So they'll always in January see what went on in December, and it'll be like a month behind. That cadence, I think, would work.
Okay. Yes, so then the December, that meeting will be with the steering committee.
Right.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Danielle? Okay.
Okay, so then do you guys want to scroll back up and I'll go through the articles with you? I'll just be relaying basically some of the things that we determined need to be added or be organized. And so not in a super detailed way, like, for example, Article 2, general provisions. General provisions is a common title. It's already in your zoning ordinance. And you can see there under the first bullet point, the kind of things that it entails: fences, temporary buildings, yard projections. But two things that we talked about is including provisions that allow rooftop solar. And updating the language on accessory structures, which is very long and hard if someone calls with just a very basic question of how big can my shed be. You have to, these are the things we're trying to streamline so that Danielle doesn't have to spend 30 minutes looking through it or calling me and saying, I can't find it, or these two things contradict themselves. So in the general provisions, I think we'll likely be pulling most of that language over and then trying to clean it up and then adding those two bullet points in Article 2. The Article 3 is where we get into the different zoning districts and the map. So this is based on the future land use map that we went over in the master plan, right? When we're visioning how we want the township to look. So now it's time to actually use that and base some of our zoning districts off that. And in the one case that we'll be doing that, if you can see under Article 3, the second dash there, is that we think that we can probably consolidate the three commercial districts to two, mainly because you have three and the only real differences between them are, you know, the size of the parcel, and a lot of them are side by side. So I'm not sure over time how that happens, but businesses that are on the same corridor, for example, can very likely be in the same zone and have the same standards. So we think that those can be condensed. And what we'll have to do there, and if you want to scroll down to the end of the packet, that's where I gave you some examples here of what the use tables could look like. So this is an example from another community that we work with, where you can see, and I'll tell you, page 10, if you want to start there. This is Acme Township, that's up near Charlotte City.
It's really Acme Township. I thought that was just a.
So you can see the different zoning districts along the top, and then we've separated the uses by major land use categories: agricultural uses, residential. The list of them there, and then it's going to tell you if this is a special land use or a permitted land use. And then that star indicates if there is that little asterisk like next to the S, indicates if there are additional standards that you need to adhere to. So that you can go to one table, you can see where it's allowed, and if you have other standards that you have to follow. So this is one way that we can do it.
So if I could ask a question?
Yeah.
So I love this chart. I think it's great. But if I go through here and I say, okay, residential uses, and I'm looking at home occupations, and I see here that it's permitted, with some standards. But where do I go to find the ordinance that's specifically?
So one thing we started doing, and this is always changing as we're improving it, is we can add another column to this table that instead of having a star, for example, we'll have the actual clause that you can hyperlink. So let's say it says agricultural assembly space. Do you see that's the very first option?
Yes.
It says S. Instead of that asterisk, we would have another column at the end of this table that would say section 3.225. You can click on it and it will take you right there to what the standards
Perfect.
are.
Perfect.
So that's one way we've been updating these tables as we go. So that is that option. If that's combining the entire township in one table. Another option is if you go down to page 39, we have the village residential district. It has a map there that shows you where those are permitted, the intent and purpose of that zone, some images of the market. And then it has the condensed table for just that zone, what's allowed. And you can see here that there's a column. And now I'm looking at page 40. This is the regulated uses just for this zone, and it will show you approval. Is it by right or special use? And then you can see this column here that says use specific standards. That's where you would just click on that, and that's hyperlinked. So we can combine all of it for the entire township, or we can break them down by zone, or we could do both, really. But those are some of the options that we have for improving the kind of list format that the township has now. That's harder to read through.
And what's your view when you say zoning maps? Are you looking at actually inserting some of the zoning maps just for illustration purposes?
So the zoning map is, there will be a zoning map in the zoning ordinance for the entire township. But then we can also break them out like this one is to show you if you're interested in building something in the village residential district, it's yellow is where that's permitted. So it can be broken down by zone but we'll definitely have the full zoning map embedded into it.
Okay. And then you'll just take subparts of it as it pertains to the particular
Yeah.
section. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. So that is, if we scroll back up to page 2, that's really what's going to be happening in Article 2, is refining the permitted uses, putting them in that table, figuring out, I think there's some in there that could probably be removed that might not exist anymore, some uses that do exist that are included. We'll want to update it to include any marijuana uses if that ordinance ends up being passed. I don't know if it's not, but there are updates to be made. And one really big one that we've all talked about is the dimensional standards table that refers to footnotes that are, haven't been updated consistently. So we want to use this time to look at our setbacks, probably start including lot coverage, right? So how much of your building, what percentage of your building can take up the lot?
What percentage of your lot can be taken up by buildings?
Yes, thank you.
I understand this.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah. Looking at lot widths, those are really important as well. So this is the area where we'll be doing that. Some other things we talked about with the steering committee is, right now with landscaping, you generally just have screening standards. So if there's a residence, it's basically if there's a residential use that's next to anything that isn't residential, there's a screening standard, which is a good standard. But we're also saying that, you know, especially along Dixie Highway or along any other corridor you might want, you can have higher landscaping standards. For example, all the power sports, like they have planted some like small hedges in the front of their buildings. They just did that because it looks nice. But you can make that required if you want. And that's very common. So we're gonna look at that. What's a reasonable amount of landscaping that someone should do to kind of beautify the parcel, stormwater management, all that, but not so excessive that it's really expensive.
And we're talking commercial and industrial
Yes.
parcels.
Yeah,
Not
we would-
residential.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then here we'll also be looking at off-street parking and loading standards, so we can do that by zone as well. Right now, you just have general standards, but we can by zone, because they might change by zone, right? We'll want to look at those parking formulas. We might want to start thinking about, you know, giving the planning commission some discretion to waive parking requirements where they don't make sense. Because I'm gonna be honest, we're gonna spend a lot of time working on this, and it's hard to get everything exactly perfect with this. As I'm sure you guys know, when you deal with site plans, there might be a formula that works perfectly on this parcel for this land, with this amount of parking spaces, and it might be a little excessive with a slightly different use on a different parcel. So we have to build in a little bit of discretion for the planning commission. And that's what we talked about with parking in particular. You know, there's very commonly like planning commission can waive up to 20% of this requirement if lists some criteria that makes sense to everyone. So we would be talking about that in this section. Article 4 is the overlay district, so that's where we're going to slide in the new Dixie Highway overlay language. We're done with, so that will be an easy one. Article 5, site development standards. So this is where we get into all of the things we want to see basically during your site plan. So landscaping, off-street parking, exterior lighting, signs, stormwater. So as I mentioned before, we can do a lot of that by zone. For example, if you're in this business zone, we can talk about what the different off-street standards are, but we still need a section with more general provisions. And that's, for example, if your parking calculation comes up with 11.7, then you round up to 12. Like those kind of general standards that we need to follow. We're going to update those in the site development section. Exterior lighting. We didn't have too much of a thorough discussion about that. I think your lighting is probably fine. The signs, that, for example, has federal legislation. We need to make sure that we are aligned with. So those are the major kind of, if you remember the most recent site plan, we went through these are the things that we ended up talking to the candidate about. Like, we need better screening. Your loading zone isn't in the right place. That's too much parking. That's where these standards are all here in the site development section, so that we can just point to this one section and say, you need to read through this before you submit your site plan. Then Article 6 is the supplemental use standard. So that's what I was talking about in that use table, where if you have a use that is hard to be super compatible with surrounding land uses, we have an additional layer of standards. And that's where these are going to be. So you want a certain agricultural operation that's permitted, but click here to see what those standards are. When they click, this is the section it's going to take them to. And it's going to say agricultural operations. You have to have a wider setback than was in this, that was listed before. You have to do this, 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 and this. So there will be one section, whereas right now, all of those are repeated in every single zone, right? So if there's one use that has an additional set of standards, whatever zone that's permitted in, that paragraph is repeated, 5 or 6 times. So now we're just trying to condense that into one area with all of those standards. So these are very use specific, and you can imagine what they're going to be. They're going to be the ones like a drive-through that could cause problems with circulation, or they're louder. Any use that might just cause a little disruption, we're going to have this additional layer of standards there. Is this all making sense so far?
Yep.
Okay. So Article 7, the site plan review process. A lot of this as well can be done by tables or flow charts that really outline exactly what is expected of the applicant. So we want to think of these sections sometimes as just being able to tear off and give to an applicant. Like, yes, that use is permitted. You want to take the next step. Here's Article 7, and we can just break it off and give that to them. And there's a very clear outline of, first you go to this person, get it approved. Then you submit your site plan. These are all the things you need. Then you have to come to the planning commission. And you have to give us everything by this date. We're no longer going to be accepting site plans that come in, 2 days beforehand because we're buddies with you. Right, so that's when we want to really standardize everything here. And that's also going to outline, if you submitted a site plan and we gave you all these revisions and you didn't get back to us for 18 months, you have to start over. Or if you did a site plan and it was approved and then you amended it slightly, here are the criteria for what's considered a minor amendment, what's a major amendment. Do you need to start at square one again? Like, this is the things we just want to clarify in this section for our applicants. It's really for our applicants. I mean, it will help us out tremendously as well, but we want to make it easy for them so we have a good reputation for development.
Save a lot of the discussion we had with that last
Yes.
project we worked on.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so a part of that is actually going to be, and it's already in there, I just don't think it's necessarily followed all the time, is a pre-application meeting. So it's coming in before someone invests, because if you have to get an architect and engineer, it can cost thousands of dollars to do those site plans. So before you're going to invest $2,000, come in and talk to us first, and we'll help show you, like, that use isn't even allowed there, like that. We don't want to waste your time or money. So come talk to us first. We will tell you what the process is, if this is permitted, and then go spend your money and come back to us. So that's what Article 7 is going to be.
Michelle, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I need to, I think, kind of push pause and make sure I'm calibrated correctly here, because when I came aboard, I was given what I believe to be the current township zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
And I guess my first question would be, does your annotated summary that you prepared for tonight, does that correlate to the articles in the existing ordinance?
No.
It does
This
not.
is our new proposed
Okay.
organization. So we're going to pull that language from the existing one into this new format and update it from there.
Okay, because I saw some, I guess, some parallels between your annotation and the existing ordinance, but I saw many significant variations. So it
Mhm.
wasn't registering. So what you've annotated is,
Our proposal,
Okay.
basically, for what we'll be doing.
that makes much more sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and that goes to what I said in the beginning, that rather than take what we have and try to dress it up, we said, let's just make sure that we cover it, and that'll be that chart that says we didn't let anything drop through, but this needs to be reorganized.
Well, and now I understand the bulldoze reference, because as I look at this zoning or, this ordinance, I'm thinking, wow, this is a very ambitious project, because this is very dense and it is packed with legalese coming from an attorney.
Yeah.
I can say that. So, okay, that's very helpful.
Article 8 is going to be very similar to Article 7, but it's going to refer only to special land uses, which I don't think actually exists currently. And this is where we can outline the special land use permit process that we go through annually or every 3 years. We can really codify what that process is. And that generally special land uses then will have to go through a hearing. So we'll outline the public hearing process. That's usually a pretty shorter section.
Mhm.
Article 9 is land development options. So this is where we are recommending that we put the community language. And that we sort of rethink PDs. I know that right now it's considered an overlay. It could go in the overlay section, but Sarah, who's a colleague of mine who was at the steering committee meeting, has recommended that we really just think of this more like a special land use and treat it as an additional layer of criteria that you have to meet, but that way you don't have to necessarily rezone a property every time you want something to be a PD.
Well, I think that has a merit. Some of the questions I would ask though would be, if we treat it like a special land use, is that some process that we have to continually go through and reevaluate and renew?
No, so that what you might do with the special land use permit or people coming every year, that seems to have been a condition upon their approval, but that's not necessary. So
Okay,
we wouldn't have to make someone with a PUD come in all the time and do
Okay.
that. So, and this will warrant much larger discussion. We didn't get into this too much with the steering committee, and so we have time to think about this, but generally, the way it is right now with overlays, if somebody wants to do a PUD, they have to come in, request that it gets rezoned, and then that one instance go to the ZBA, and then come back to the planning commission. So there's other ways to treat it as if, still treat it with what it deserves. It's a, especially with the 40 acre minimum, it's a big deal. So we do want it to be a special land use and that we have additional protection and criteria that you have to meet, but it can help shorten that process. So that was one thing that Sarah and I added here, and that we will definitely talk about in the steering committee more.
yeah, and that's not till March, so we'll be into the process and maybe, because I think that's going to be a larger discussion.
Yeah. And then otherwise, a lot of these things are already included because, for example, the site planning and land development, there's a condo act that you have to follow. So a lot of that language is pretty laid out. So this is really just recommending moving all of these different kind of land options that people have into one article.
Okay,
Okay, Article 10 is non-conforming uses, lots. This is, I guess, Article 5 right now, so we would, or a part of Article 5, I think that's a part of your general provisions, but we would make it its own section. And some of the things we talked about there was the difference between gross or net acreage, and that we need to be more consistent with that, and that's maybe something we can put in the zoning ordinance. And then secondly, what to do if it's a non-conforming, if someone wants to build on a non-conforming lot, but they respect all the setbacks, is that something that we would be willing to allow or not? And I think right now it might be not clearly written, but there is precedent for how that's been handled. So we just want to make sure those two things match. Then Article 11 is the zoning board of appeals, what their roles and responsibilities are. Generally, this is outlined by the state act, so there's not many changes that can happen here. The only thing that we talk about is the different kinds of variances. Is some communities allow the zoning board of appeals to approve non-use or use variances, and some do not allow them to make that decision on a use variance. And Jenny, if you're staying on steering committee board, you can help represent the BZA's feelings on that. But otherwise, that section doesn't really change because we don't have the authority to change your role in this anyways.
right.
Okay, so then lastly, or the last major ones of substance here is administration, enforcement, and violations. This is just going to clarify, if you don't follow our rules, what happens next. and a little bit more about fees, performance guarantees. It's not an exciting article, I won't lie about that one. Amendments is a good one. It's important to know the process for what happens. How do we amend a text or map, a zoning map or zoning text? And I don't think that's super laid out as it is. And so we want to make sure that, you know, if someone from the community comes in here and they want to change something, or someone on the planning commission wants to change something, we understand that we're following, you know, the correct process. And then lastly, definitions, and I will say that's always a tough one. But we will, our guarantee is really, we will make sure that every land use that is in our table has a definition. Because, you know, people come with really creative ideas like that. The warehouses with the little office attached, the site condos.
Yeah.
You know, people have uses that we don't always have specifically written. So we need to make sure that we have language that's inclusive, that says, and other similar uses, so that we can include new ideas, but also if there are new ideas that are taking off, we have definitions for all of those. And then, of course, adding as many images as we can. Those are really helpful when it's like, what's the setback? How do you count? Do you count in this line or this line?
Right, we've had long discussions on that.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do is, you know, with your blessing tonight, if you guys all say, yeah, that sounds good, we're gonna use this as our baseline of, okay, this is where we're gonna start. We've talked with the steering committee, we've now talked with the planning commission, and as we draft our new sections, we're gonna base it off this. That doesn't mean we can't change our mind when we meet as a steering committee and we talk about them in more detail. Modifications can obviously be made during up until it's approved. But this is just letting you know, this is where we're gonna start for December. And then onward.
I have a comment.
Yes.
You're making Danielle feel very, very
Okay.
happy. Oh, she's just grinning from ear to ear. This is gonna make things so much
Well, we
simpler.
haven't been through the process yet, so you don't know.
Well, no, when it's done,
So
when it's
we-
done.
end results, yeah. And so-
So we talked about the, you know, review process and
Mhm.
schedule, but what is going to be the approval process?
I actually have that outlined and I should send that to you all, but you do have to go through a public hearing. And then we'll have to send the county a letter. We give them 30 days to send us back any comments. I don't, it's different by county, so I'll have to check with Oakland. I don't know if we are mandated to make the changes that they request. I think we just have to look at them and
Yeah,
decide
I
if
don't
we want to.
I don't think we are.
So we're just giving them the opportunity to provide input. And then it will go to the board of trustees. And then it will approve.
And you're looking at, so as far as going to the board of trustees, just with the final product, would you do any type
Yeah,
of?
so that's a good point. We can, well, you guys will have a better understanding than I would of where they stand on certain issues. I would say definitely if you think anything is controversial, that we should be going to them more often than just here's.
I mean, I would look for the staff and Jim, you know, as we're going through, if there's something you think you need to give a heads up to the board, you can do that. But
Yeah, between you, Bob, and Jim, I think we can probably.
so I
That's a good point, is we should probably go to them at least once before the final approval.
even just as an update, here's where we are. I think honestly, you know, once we, I think even taking some of these examples to the township board and saying, this is the vision we have. You know, everybody's buying into it. We're in agreement. We're going to have more tables, charts, hyperlinks so that you know, have ready reference and just make, you know, they're the ones actually paying for this, right? So
Yeah.
you say, you know, just make sure you guys are in agreement. We're all in agreement and then we go forward.
stick figure drawings that we have now.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question, and it kind of ties into Jenny's question regarding approval on the back end. But what about, is there any type of legal oversight that is, kind of periodically reviewing what's being proposed? Because, words, phrases, even punctuation can be significant if challenged. And I'd hate to get through the process and find out that something that's been, a lot of time's been invested will not hold legal water, so to speak.
Yeah, so we can do this two ways. I mean, we can invite Will on the attorney onto the steering committee. Or we can give him the draft at the end.
Right, yeah, I don't know.
But definitely the attorney will read it.
Yeah.
I'll say
I-
this, we will definitely give it to the attorney.
I don't think it's a benefit to give him a partial. I think that when we've got it all, and we can show, here's, the chart, here's all of the ordinances we had, here's how it's now incorporated into the new, or where we're just, stopping and not using some existing ones or whatever, he can see the big picture
Yeah.
and then look specifically at the language. We need to give him plenty of time, but I don't think, and we could get his input, but I don't think piecemealing it is going to be productive to him. I don't think he'll want that.
Well, Michelle, you've done this in other
Yeah.
municipal settings. Just out of curiosity, how is that? Is it typically done, on a rolling basis with
Mhm.
oversight, or is it done at the approval process at the end?
It's usually done at the end when
Okay.
there's a full draft, and that goes either way. I mean, as I've learned, attorneys don't always share the same opinions or, thoughts on things. So sometimes you can get 13 pages back from an attorney with write-ups, and sometimes you can say this is fine. So that's, I don't know what I'm getting into, so I'd like to avoid the 13 pages, but I also, if I give that to them section by section, I don't know if that will be beneficial. So I would probably say, let's wait till the end, but as I'm going through it, sometimes we'll give them a call with a specific question. Like, yeah, so that'll be on my end. If, Sarah, my colleague, and I are going through this and we have a question that we don't know the answer to, and we need to know something about a piece of legislation before you read it, we can call them.
Sounds like a wonderful plan. Thank you.
I'm glad you guys are up for it.
What was it? 04 was the last time was a major rewrite?
Major one, yeah, I
Yeah.
think,
It's longer than that.
2014 was a partial of some stuff.
Oh, then I think he meant something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
have
should have been 2014, but a big one was before.
I think it was.
Question about the schedule
Yes.
of meetings for the articles. What's happening in December?
The subcommittee will be meeting to go through those sections. So those four sections. So Michelle and Sarah will be rewriting and reorganizing. They'll submit that to the subcommittee
The
and
steering.
steering committee, and then we'll take a look at it, provide feedback. And in January,
We'll look at December's.
we'll look at
Okay, so
December.
this schedule is just moved back a month for the planning commission.
Right, right.
That's what I wanted to know.
Madam Chair, Jen,
Michael.
has got something. Michelle got some feedback from the Oakland County for Dixie. And can she share that real quick? Adding a little bit to the agenda?
Yeah, so I'm sorry it's not on the agenda. I just received this today.
Well, that comes under the consultant reports.
There we go.
Is that next?
Yes.
Yeah.
No public comments.
Yeah, public comments. I don't know if there's anyone online.
No,
Okay,
well, Ken Carpenter, but he's here for strictly knowledge.
okay.
So,
Any-
we wrote to the county.
Well, I have a question, but I can wait till the end,
Okay.
Okay,
so you don't.
okay.
Okay, so we sent Oakland County a letter saying that we've updated, that we've created these Dixie Highway design guidelines, and we sent it over to them, and just today I got some of their comments, so I thought I would share them with you today. So, the first one, reference the existing zoning classifications and how they relate to the proposed use. I think that we do that.
Well, and I don't know that that's relevant, right? Because the underlying zoning is intact. We're not changing that. It's a layer above and above what's already there. So to reference back
Yeah,
is really just to say, well, it's a B1 zone district.
Right.
You know, see the ordinance.
so I don't think we need to change anything here. It also says consult the road commission of Oakland County on the requirements of proposed pedestrian infrastructure such as lighting, sidewalks that are planned for the Dixie Highway right of way. So the options here are that we send that to them, or that we make clear in the regulations that the lighting and the pedestrian walkways are on the private property, not the right of way.
So,
Which was my intention.
yeah, so the question I have, do we know, is it Oakland County throughout the length of Dixie
To
Highway?
the road right away.
Yeah. Or is it state, is it Oakland County?
Yeah, there's some sections where the road right away. It's all Oakland County, but it's
Is it?
not- it's
Okay.
it's not lined up exactly as you go all through Dixie. It's like kind of jogs and some stops
All right,
around the corridor.
but it's Oakland County.
Yes.
And I think for ease of our ordinance to require, you know, as you stated, on the private property and not in the right of way,
Right.
that be placed. But also, you know, when we do site plan approvals, right, they have to go through and get any county, any requirements of the county, they would have to comply with, right?
Yeah.
So I think,
So I'm gonna just clarify with that and say, was it unclear that it's meant on private property, or see if they have something else in mind, because I don't want to.
agreed.
Okay, so for building and infrastructure, they said, ensure that walkways meet barrier-free ADA requirements. They say, could other building materials be used that require less maintenance but still meet building or still meet design standards? So I guess the answer is yes, but do we want them to? So, you know, we have pretty high building, you know, facade standards for the materials that are used, and that's because we want it to look a certain way. That's sort of the entire purpose of it. But I do take their point that, you know, brick and stone and certain things might be harder to maintain over time than, you know, siding or something, but
Power washer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the answer is, you know, I think, you know, we have established a standard for construction materials that we want. And we'll work with the applicants, but that is the standard we're trying to hold as we go up and down Dixie.
And that could be discussed during site plan review
Yeah.
or. Yep.
right.
Yep.
Okay. I might not read every single bullet point.
Oh,
If
come
you
on.
want them to. Okay.
No, I trust your judgment.
Just because like the next one says they're all, like, I think they're just asking broad, general questions that are all required design materials consistent with construction standards.
They will be, yeah.
I
Right?
mean, we have a building department with.
Yeah.
enforces building codes, so
Yeah.
yes. Okay, other recommendations, comments, or questions? And I think we talked about this and that they're bringing this up, is there are examples of what is a goal versus what is a policy, and the word, and you use the word require sometimes versus encourage. Since this is a zoning text amendment, should enforcement language be more commonly employed? So this is, if you remember, we had this conversation about how flexible we want to be. Do we want to say this is require or is this encourage? Because, and I think their point is, you know, saying encourage gives us more flexibility. It also makes it much harder to
Enforce.
enforce and require certain things. And I think we were aware of that trade-off.
Mhm.
And if you guys still feel comfortable with that. Encourage.
I am, because this is kind of new for us. And as we work with different, entities that want to do development, we'll see, quite honestly, if we had people continue to come in here and say, really, I can't put a pole barn up, then we'd say, you know what, we probably need to beef up this language so we don't keep getting the same question, because we don't want pole barns, right? So I think as we see how people are receptive to these, and if they're willing to embrace them, or if it's a resistance all the time, they want to go to the cheapest materials possible,
Yeah.
then we can always modify as needed. But I'd like to keep it flexible at first. You guys
Yeah.
agree, disagree?
Well, if we keep, again, requirement on there, we always have that time to discuss during, the site plan review. And if somebody's got a compelling reason why they want to use X versus Y, we can make that call. But again, like what we talked about with the earlier presentation, we want to give them some set of direction that they can look at what the requirements are before they invest all that money
Yeah.
in things, and understand what the end result is that we're looking for. And if we keep saying, suggested or, whatnot, then you're right. I'm going to go the cheapest material possible. If they say it's required, I've got to be, high-end product, they can factor that in and say, is this even making sense before I invest all that money?
Wait, so is that an argument for using stronger language?
For stronger language. Because we still have the capability of addressing that if we choose during the site plan review.
Of
Well-
backing off the requirement?
No, I mean,
No.
if it's required, you can't. back
Yeah,
No.
yeah, you got to enforce the ordinance.
Yeah, which is why people use the word encourage and then you get into it.
Yeah.
too. But I would say that you can start with this language. What I'd love to see this planning commission do is just really treat zoning ordinances as not quite trial and error, but if people are coming in and it's not yielding exactly what you want, you have the power to make the language stronger over time. What happens is people will write an ordinance and then they'll complain that they're not getting what they want, and then they don't do anything about it because it's a lot of work to change it. So I think you can start broad, but I think that you have a good planning commission is vigilant and understands that they have the power and control to change things if it's not working for them. So I would think you could probably start with this language, but just monitor it.
Yeah, and I think the intent would be Holly Power Sports, their initial building, went beyond what our ordinance would require, and we were all very happy with it. We were a little disappointed, when they came back with the addition, because it wasn't at that same level. But, I think that as a community, Groveland Township, what we've tried to do is work with the community and not be this rigid, we've got all these ordinances and now must do this and that. And so till December, I would suggest that you go with the, work with the community. And if we need that hammer where we say thou shalt, then, and it is true, you've got to back it up as a planning commission. If you find things aren't working and you need to be more strict, then you need to take the work to do it. Your thoughts, guys?
Well, I see Neil's point, to be honest, but I don't know, I guess I'm always in favor of just having a viable plan B. and what you've kind of laid out, Michelle, is just, monitoring it.
Yeah.
And then Plan B would be revised as needed, so.
I will say that I generally lean towards let's make things required. It's much easier to follow. It's more consistent. It's easier for the applicant and for us. It's black and white. So I generally do lean that way as well, but I think with design, since these are primarily design standards, I think this is maybe one area where there can be more flexibility. To a point, but then I think we do need to, get more specific if needed.
Right, because these aren't requirements that will pertain to loading and unloading zones. This is, what are the materials you're going to be using on the building? What type of plantings will you do for screening or for decoration? Yeah, so it's more that, and as we try to develop that view for the community.
That was basically the last question. They did make a point though that, other communities have, worked on Dixie Highway corridors before, so have you guys make sure
We did, we talked extensively with Independence. Or Springfield, I'm sorry, not Independence, Springfield.
because that is generally a best practice. So
We didn't, if I could interrupt, we didn't have a lot of dialogue with Grand Blanc, right?
Holly in Springfield.
Yeah.
Springfield didn't want us.
I know. South of us, yeah, they're like, they're like, we have our way and we don't want you to copy our way. So you do what you want. And I said, okay.
So kind of to piggyback, not to put in, but is Holly Power Sports like?
If I'm sorry, could you just state your name so we have it for the minutes?
I got it.
Okay, all right.
Anyway, so is like, since Holly Power Sports is like the only thing that's gone in during all this new stuff,
No, the new stuff has not gone in yet.
is
So.
that like your benchmark for design and quality and you
No.
mentioned reference a lot, so.
No, well, other than,
You look at that and you look at Rush, and then there's lots of stuff going on in Grove Party Store, God only knows what, but nothing to the outside, so I'm only gonna wonder what's going on the inside.
yeah, what we were referring to, first of all, the Dixie Highway Overlay District is not approved yet. We're in that process of getting it approved. So we say, well, we give people an idea, what is it we're looking at? What is kind of we're thinking? The original building that was Holly Power Sports, which was a cement block. We said the fact that, they put like a porch type structure on it, they did some stone work, they did some plantings. Those are the types of things that we want to encourage people, but we're looking at, sidewalks that aren't just concrete, right? There'll be either, a decorative stone sidewalks or paver stones, but we're looking for more upscale materials than, for example, Holly Power Sports is currently putting an addition on that will be like a pole barn. And we said, well, that's not what we're looking for in the future, folks, but that is the way it is permissible in the ordinance today. And so, they're going forward with their approval and we can't change that. But as we look at what we want in the future, we don't want pole barns, up and down the Dixie Highway. And the other thing we're looking at, we really didn't have in our ordinance was, lot sizes as it got to commercial and industrial. And we're saying, we have more commercial development that'll happen on Dixie. We don't want somebody on a 0.35 acre parcel to, cram in buildings so that we have the density in this township that you see in Waterford. That we don't want that. We want more spacious, just like we do with the residential areas. We want it with the commercial areas where we have a more less dense you know, commercial growth up and down. So those are the things that we're
Okay.
looking at.
Makes sense. So that was the county's.
That was the county's. That's
A question?
Just my question, what is the intent of the overlay, the Dixie overlay? Because when you look at the map and the master plan, for example, like up on Perryville, it goes quite a ways down Perryville into a lot of residential properties. And it encompasses almost every type of property that is in the township. What was the intent of the overlay?
I'm not following because the parcels that are within the overlay district, there'll be some that maybe go down some side roads, but the intent is that overlay district is just along Dixie Highway and some property on Grange Hall. So the intent is not to go into the residential areas, but to say we've got a corridor along Dixie Highway that as it gets developed, the overlay district you can think of as another layer of requirements for building in those parcels that is going to try to address a more architectural theme and a standard, yeah. So we don't have, we want that up north look. We want stone and wood and, you know, maybe like even steel roofs. We talked about not having a lot of buildings with flat roofs unless it's a more industrial or commercial type application. So we're looking more at architectural features as we go along. If you are a residential parcel, let's say you've got 5 acres right now and a house and a park on Dixie Highway.
On Dixie Highway.
And you say, you know what? I want this barn and this house for as long as I live. I don't want it to be commercial. I want it to be residential. Then you're going to stay just the way you are.
That's what I was getting at.
Yep, you're going to
So
stay
that's
this way.
all I-
This is everybody that's there. Your grandfather them. We're not here to make people change their residential properties. We're saying as commercial growth develops, or there, I think there was a part in there, if there was substantial improve in, did we address residential if there was? We removed it. Okay, so we took everything out on residential. It's only commercial and industrial growth in that district that will be subject to the
And
overlay.
it's just basically created a higher standard.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I have one other question. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but
I'm sorry.
who decides where tornado sirens go?
Oakland County, right?
Probably emergency management.
I would think it's at the
Some
county.
of my
level
residential
because-
out on the corner. And
Leave
I'm
it.
having a hard time getting it rezoned because neighbors are gonna. But, yeah, there's one there and I don't know
It
if
should be
anyone
on
would
the right
ever
of way.
want to build a house with a tornado siren.
Is it in the right of way?
It's got, I mean,
Yeah, some of the right away, but
Oh,
seriously, like,
county.
I just put a cross street in the Renaissance Festival.
Oh, yeah. Older than my house.
I don't mind it. Sales problem.
To sell. Yeah, I'd say Oakland County. Okay.
So they generally do, like, they have a hazard mitigation, and I would assume that if that's.
I remember when we first got those sirens, it was after the tornado in '97. And the county came in, and I want to think Steve got a grant. There were some grants that were obtained, and the county picked where the first ones would go. Bob would probably remember this. And the counties, like, based on density, like, which most effective, obviously, first one went down by the trailer park because there was nothing at the time. And then you go your high hazard, like Groveland Oaks, Renaissance Festival. And then I want to say emergency management made that decision on. That was 20 years ago, 97 or 20.
I just thought I'd throw it out there. in case anybody-
For the overlay though, there behind my desk on the window back there is a huge map and it shows you exactly what the overlay is, where it's located. You guys know. Look at that. It's not out yet because we haven't got them all made.
And so then last would be your planning report, Michelle, that you provided us.
Sure, I think I'll go through this pretty quickly. quickly. One of the top stories regarding the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. So I know you have a lot of county-owned recreation. Do you have state park? Do you have state park as well? Do you have any MDNR-owned land?
Yeah, we have-
Yeah, that's a part of that 30%.
Yeah, you're allowed to be.
24% of the township is county,
DNR.
whatever,
Oh,
non-taxable.
So they recently did a study, and this is mainly about accessibility to their parks and equity, and finding that a lot of the parks are sort of concentrated up north, as you would imagine. And so they're looking at some strategies that put equity at the forefront there. And really in how that plays out here is just that I think one of their points is that they'll be looking for more land or recreational opportunities in this part of the state.
yeah, probably not this county or this township.
Probably
though.
not. No.
They got all they're getting.
And then at the federal level, there are some housing bills that are going through. So the Housing Supply and Affordability Act is really discussing ways to empower municipalities more to increase housing supply. Again, I don't think that that will be coming to the township, but housing is a huge problem state and nationwide. And so as planners, we're staying up to date on this because it's a huge implication.
And is it accessibility, availability?
Yeah, there's a huge shortage of housing, basically, which is why cost of housing is, so to build a new house is very expensive with labor and materials. And so to build a house costs a lot more than a moderate, middle class family can afford new construction. And then on top of that, they're generally building only at the very higher end of the income because that's more profitable. And so there's a huge housing shortage for people making, $50,000 to $75,000 a year. So, I'm sure you hear millennials complaining about this all the time. It's a huge problem to buy a home. And so the federal government is finally trying to figure something out there. And so that would be giving grants to regional governments or municipalities to try to help expand.
Just curious, would you think that they would get to a point, we have minimum square footage requirements as most any, community does. Do you think that they'd ever come in and address that and say, you have to offer, what's ours, 1,800 square feet?
For a minimum, 1,400.
1,400?
I don't think our country is there yet.
Okay.
They're gonna tell you guys to do that, but
Okay.
I will say as planners, we tell people in cities to do that all the time.
Okay,
The federal government won't
Okay.
probably, but we do tell people, like, if you have a minimum lot size of an acre, that's gonna be much harder for someone making less money to buy. And so if you want, your teachers to live in your community, you might need to think about having smaller lots, smaller houses. So that's something that planners talk about all the time.
okay,
But sanitation,
Yeah,
septic
it's the
fields.
people that have
yeah.
Yeah.
Not the wells and septic fields we have.
Yeah. I think that's really the last major story. I mean, there's the Michigan Downtown Association, which, the township doesn't quite have a downtown, but we are thinking about that village development district that might serve as that. So I don't know if there's, if you guys ever get sent to conferences. For last time we were talking about a conference, you guys were all gonna go together.
Yeah,
Did that end up happening?
we went.
She chickened out.
I don't know, guys. This one's at the Motor City Casino Hotel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the MDA, the Michigan Downtown Association, they're really inspiring conversations because, they really showed projects that have already been implemented. So we can see what other people are doing. So that's why we included that in there. And that's it for me.
I have one question. You made a comment about rounding up on parking spaces. And you said, 11.7, you'd make it 12.
Yeah.
What if it was 11.49? Now 4.4 means no. It'd be just, the
You
11.
are a math teacher.
How can you tell?
I'm serious because that's,
We probably had her.
she did. Trig and calculus.
That's up for us to decide. There's no like rule about that necessarily. It's generally 0.5 and over you round up.
Right.
0.5.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
guess 0.49 you would round down.
Well, from our,
That's both.
Nice.
One place.
But it does come up. I mean, it did come up with that one property.
yeah, we definitely should probably have some, yeah.
39.5 acres.
Any other questions?
I make a motion.
I think so.
I make a motion. We adjourn.
A second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.